My name is Amelia, and I'm 32 years old. The moment they laughed at my clothes, I felt 12 years old all over again. When I received the invitation to my high school reunion, I wasn't sure if I should laugh or cry. Part of me was curious, wondering if people had changed, if the bullies who once made my life miserable had finally grown into kinder adults. Another part of me felt sick just looking at the embossed lettering, because the thought of stepping back into that world made my stomach twist with dread. Still, I decided to go. Not because I was desperate to see anyone, but because I wanted closure. I told myself that I was a different person now, that the Amelia who had been mocked for wearing thrift store clothes, who ate lunch alone in the cafeteria, who cried quietly in the bathroom stalls, was gone. I wasn't that girl anymore. I spent days debating what to wear. My closet wasn't filled with designer labels, and I didn't care much for trends. I chose something simple, a navy blue dress that was comfortable and professional, paired with a cardigan I loved. It wasn't flashy, but it was me, authentic, honest. I told myself that would be enough. The night of the reunion, I pulled up outside the venue, my heart pounding. The building looked stunning from the outside, string lights glowing. Valet parking attendants rushing around. I took a deep breath, adjusted my cardigan, and walked inside. Almost immediately, I felt their eyes on me. The laughter, the chatter. It slowed just enough that I knew people were taking in my presence. I smiled nervously, clutching my purse a little tighter. Then I heard it. The first whisper. Wow. Same old Amelia. Doesn't look like she's changed a bit. Followed by a chuckle. Did she seriously wear that? To a reunion? And then louder, bolder. Guess some people never learn about fashion. The laughter stung, slicing through me like it always had. I felt heat rising in my cheeks, that same, familiar shame from high school washing over me. My cardigan suddenly felt too heavy, my dress too plain, my entire body too obvious. I forced myself to keep walking, offering polite nods, pretending not to hear. But the comments didn't stop. They looked me up and down, their fake smiles barely concealing their ridicule. It was as though no time had passed at all, like we were still teenagers, and I was still the punchline to their cruel jokes. One group in particular, the same clique that had tormented me in high school, burst into laughter as I passed. I caught a snippet. It's like she walked straight out of a thrift store. My stomach twisted. I wanted to turn around and run. I wanted to crawl back into the car, drive home, and never look back. But I didn't. I stood there, forcing myself to smile, my heart pounding so hard I thought they could hear it. And for a brief moment, I was that little girl again, the one who sat in the corner of the cafeteria, picking at her food while laughter echoed around her. The humiliation was suffocating. I felt small, invisible, worthless. But then, something inside me whispered a reminder. You are not that girl anymore. You are not powerless. You are not nothing. I straightened my shoulders, took a steadying breath, and scanned the room. Yes, they were laughing at me. Yes, they were mocking me like they always had. But what none of them realized was that the woman standing before them wasn't the same girl they remembered. Because while they were busy mocking my clothes, they had no idea whose name was on the deed to the very building they were standing in. But they had no idea the woman they were mocking now wasn't the same girl they remembered. The way they mocked me that night was nothing new. It had always been my role to be their joke. As I stood in that reunion hall, forcing myself to breathe through the humiliation, I couldn't help but be pulled back into the past. Their laughter, their whispers, it was all so familiar. It was like I was 17 again, standing in the high school hallway with my books clutched to my chest, praying nobody would notice me. The truth is, I had always been the poor girl. My family never had much. My mother worked 2 jobs, and my father struggled to keep steady employment. We didn't live in a big house, we didn't drive shiny cars, and I didn't wear name-brand clothes. Most of my outfits came from secondhand stores, hand-me-downs, or discount racks. And in high school, that made me an easy target. I remember one morning in sophomore year. I had worn a floral blouse I loved. It was soft, comfortable, and made me feel a little prettier than usual. But the moment I walked into homeroom, I heard the snickers. Did you raid your grandma's closet, Amelia? Someone laughed. Another voice chimed in. No, she probably found it in a donation bin. The room erupted in laughter, and I wanted to sink into the floor. I didn't wear that blouse again. Then there was prom. I had saved for months, babysitting and working odd jobs to buy a dress. It wasn't designer, but it was mine, and I felt beautiful in it, at least until I arrived. Evelyn, the queen bee of our class, always dressed to perfection, looked me up and down with that practiced smirk. How sweet, she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. She's wearing a bridesmaid's dress. Laughter echoed again, and suddenly, I wished I had never come. The cafeteria was the worst. It was a daily battlefield where I sat alone at the far edge, pretending to be busy with homework or a book. Sometimes people would walk by my table and whisper loud enough for me to hear. She smells like thrift stores. Do you think she owns more than 3 outfits? I heard she can't even afford lunch. They thought it was harmless fun. But it wasn't fun for me. Every word, every laugh chipped away at me, piece by piece, until I believed them. Until I thought maybe I really wasn't worth more than the clothes on my back. The teachers never stepped in. They looked the other way, too focused on grades or attendance to notice the cruelty that seeped through every corner of that school. And the other students, the ones who weren't cruel themselves, stayed silent. Maybe they didn't want to become the next target. Maybe they just didn't care. Either way, their silence hurt almost as much as the laughter. There were a few who showed kindness. A girl named Rachel, who once offered to sit with me at lunch. A boy named Marcus, who quietly complimented my essays in English class. But those moments were rare, fleeting, and often overshadowed by the ridicule. I carried that ridicule with me long after graduation. It shaped how I saw myself, how I moved through the world. I grew used to being overlooked, dismissed, ignored. I learned how to shrink myself so others wouldn't notice me, how to blend into the background so I wouldn't become a target. That's why the reunion cut so deep. For years I had told myself I was over it, that I had grown stronger, that the bullying no longer had power over me. But the moment I heard those familiar laughs, saw those mocking glances, I was right back in that cafeteria, clutching my tray and wishing I could disappear. I remembered one particular day during senior year. I had worn my favorite shoes, cheap canvas sneakers. I had decorated myself with markers and doodles. They made me smile, made me feel unique. But when I walked into math class, a boy pointed at them and shouted, "Look! Amelia made her shoes because she can't afford real ones." The whole class laughed. Even the teacher chuckled. I forced myself to laugh too, as though I were in on the joke, but inside, I was crumbling. Those memories never left me. They stayed tucked away in the back of my mind, shadows that whispered whenever I tried to feel confident. "You're still that poor girl. You'll never be good enough. They'll always laugh at you." So when I walked into the reunion and heard the same old whispers, it wasn't just about the clothes I was wearing that night. It was about every insult, every laugh, every moment of shame I had carried for years. And yet, there was a difference now. Back then, I had no voice. Back then, I believed their lies. Back then, I thought my worth was tied to the brands on my clothes or the money in my family's bank account. But now, I knew better. I had built a life far beyond what they could imagine. I had clawed my way out of that small town, worked harder than anyone gave me credit for, and created something lasting. The very building they were standing in, mocking me inside, was proof of that. They still saw the girl in thrift store clothes. They didn't see the woman who signed the checks, who owned the property, who had rebuilt herself piece by piece. And as their laughter echoed around me at the reunion, I realized something important. They weren't laughing at me anymore. They were laughing at a ghost, at the memory of a girl who no longer existed. But what none of them knew was how much I had changed since high school. I left that town with nothing but scars and a determination to never be small again. When I walked across that graduation stage at 18, clutching my diploma with sweaty hands, I didn't just leave high school behind. I left behind years of humiliation, years of whispered insults, years of being the outcast. I swore to myself that day, I would never let those voices define me again. But leaving was easier said than done. After graduation, I packed up my few belongings into a second-hand suitcase and moved out of my parents' small house. I didn't have much, just enough for community college tuition and a tiny room in a shared apartment. I worked nights at a diner, serving coffee and greasy food until my feet ached, then spent my days in classes, pushing myself harder than I ever had before. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't easy. There were nights I went to bed hungry, mornings I woke up exhausted, afternoons I cried in the bathroom at work because I was so overwhelmed. But every time I thought about giving up, I remembered the laughter from high school. I remembered Evelyn's smirk, Daniel's jokes, the whispers about my clothes, and I told myself, I will never give them the satisfaction of being right. So I pushed forward. Community college turned into a scholarship at a state university. I chose business as my major, not because it was easy, but because I wanted to learn how to build something of my own. I wanted control. I wanted independence. I wanted to prove that my worth was more than the clothes on my back. College was a turning point for me. For the first time, I met people who didn't care about where I came from or what I wore. They cared about my ideas, my work ethic, my determination. I found friends who encouraged me, professors who believed in me, and opportunities that scared me but forced me to grow. I took internships that barely paid, worked 3 part-time jobs at once, and studied until my eyes blurred. I lived on instant noodles and peanut butter sandwiches, but I also began to see the outlines of a future that didn't involve shrinking myself just to survive. After graduating, I landed a job at a mid-sized marketing firm. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. I poured myself into that job, staying late, volunteering for projects nobody wanted, learning everything I could. Slowly, I built a reputation not as the poor, invisible girl, but as someone reliable, creative, and relentless. But even as I built that career, I had a dream simmering beneath the surface. I didn't just want to work for someone else. I wanted something of my own. It started small. I noticed how much businesses struggled with their branding, how they wasted money on flashy campaigns that didn't connect with people. I thought about how often I had been judged by appearances, by clothes and labels, and I realized, appearances aren't everything. What matters is authenticity, connection, truth. So, on the side, I began freelancing, designing logos, creating marketing strategies for small businesses, helping people tell their stories in a way that actually resonated. It wasn't much at first, just a few clients, a few $100s here and there. But it grew. And then, one day, I took the leap. I left the safety of my job and launched my own marketing firm. The first year was brutal. I worked around the clock, hustling for clients, making mistakes, learning on the fly. There were times I thought I had made a huge mistake, times I considered crawling back to the safety of a paycheck, but I didn't. I couldn't. Because every time I thought about quitting, I remembered that high school cafeteria, that chorus of laughter, that feeling of being invisible. I told myself, if I can survive that, I can survive this. And slowly it began to pay off. Word spread, clients recommended me. My company grew, little by little, until I was hiring employees, renting office space, signing bigger contracts than I had ever imagined. The girl who once wore thrift store clothes now signed deals worth more than her parents' house. And yet, through it all, I never flaunted my success. I didn't post flashy photos online. I didn't brag to old classmates. I didn't try to prove myself to the people who had hurt me. I stayed quiet, focused, humble, because I knew the sweetest victories are the ones revealed in silence. By the time the reunion invitation arrived in my mailbox, my life looked nothing like it had back then. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. I had a business that was flourishing, a life filled with people who valued me, and financial security I had once only dreamed of. But the greatest irony? One of my investments was real estate. I had bought several properties over the years, and one of them happened to be the very venue where the reunion was being held. So when I walked into that room in my simple blue dress, hearing the familiar laughter, I wasn't powerless. I wasn't invisible. I was the owner of the ground they were standing on. They didn't know it yet, of course. To them, I was still Amelia, the thrift store girl, the target of their jokes. But what they didn't realize was that every laugh, every insult, every cruel whisper from our teenage years had fueled the fire that brought me here. By the time the reunion rolled around, I was no longer the girl they remembered. I was the woman they never saw coming. I never flaunted my success, because I knew what silence could do. By the time I was in my late 20s, my life looked nothing like the one my classmates had predicted for me. They thought I would fade into obscurity, that I'd never make anything of myself. But quietly, steadily, I had built something powerful. My business wasn't just surviving anymore, it was thriving. We had an office downtown, a small but loyal team, and clients that ranged from mom-and-pop shops to nationally recognized companies. I had learned how to adapt, how to innovate, how to make my mark in an industry that thrived on flashy personalities. But here's the thing, I never wanted to be flashy. While others posted their every achievement online, I stayed silent. I didn't upload photos of expensive vacations or designer handbags. I didn't shout my victories from the rooftops. I let my work speak for itself. And in that silence, I discovered a kind of power I had never known before. Because when you move in silence, nobody sees you coming. I drove a modest car, wore simple clothes, and lived below my means. Not because I couldn't afford more, but because I didn't need to prove anything. The people who mattered already knew my worth. And the people who didn't, their opinion wasn't worth my energy. That's what made my real estate investments so satisfying. I had bought my first property almost by accident, a small storefront that came up for sale near my office. I leased it out and was surprised at how steady the income was. From there, I bought another, then another. I learned the ropes of property ownership, made mistakes, and kept going. One of the properties I purchased was an event venue. At the time, it was just a practical decision. The building was beautiful but underutilized, and I saw potential. I renovated it, partnered with event planners, and soon it became a popular spot for weddings, galas, and corporate events. It wasn't until months later that I realized something ironic. This was the same venue my old high school had booked for reunions, the same place where my classmates would one day gather. When the invitation came, I couldn't help but laugh. The thought of them mocking me inside a building that belonged to me felt poetic. But I didn't say a word. I didn't call the committee, didn't boast, didn't drop hints. I let them believe whatever they wanted about me. Because that's the thing about silence, it keeps people underestimating you. And sometimes, being underestimated is the greatest advantage of all. Even in my personal life, I stayed quiet about my success. When acquaintances from the past tried to dig for information, asking what I did for work or where I lived, I kept my answers vague. I run a business, I'd say with a shrug. I keep busy. That was enough to satisfy their curiosity while keeping my truth safe. Of course, there were people in my life who knew the full story, my close friends, my employees, my parents before they passed. They were proud of me, and I cherished their support. But I never felt the need to rub my success in the faces of the people who had once mocked me. Until the reunion. Walking into that hall, hearing the laughter about my clothes, I realized how little had changed in their minds. To them, I was still Amelia, the poor girl, the outsider. They hadn't even considered the possibility that I might have grown, might have built something of my own. And that's what made it so satisfying. Because while they judged me for my simple dress, they didn't know I had signed the checks that paid for the very lights shining above them. They didn't know the food they were eating, the chairs they sat on, the roof over their heads. It was all mine. They were laughing at me in my own house. And the best part? I didn't need to say a word. Not yet. Their mockery only made the truth sweeter. Because I knew the silence wouldn't last forever. At the right moment, I would reveal it. Not to gloat. Not to prove them wrong. But to reclaim the dignity they had tried to strip away from me for years. For now, though, I let them laugh. I let them sneer at my cardigan, whisper about my dress, roll their eyes as though I were still the outcast. Because every word, every chuckle, every insult, they were all digging the grave of their own arrogance. And I stood there, calm, steady, unshaken, because I knew something they didn't. The girl they thought they were mocking no longer existed. She had been replaced by a woman who had built an empire in silence. But their obsession with appearances would be the very thing that exposed them. Walking into that room felt like stepping back in time and into the lion's den. The reunion was held in the main ballroom of the venue I owned, though of course, nobody there knew it yet. The moment I stepped inside, the sound of chatter and laughter washed over me. Clusters of people stood in familiar formations, old cliques that hadn't changed in over a decade. The cheerleaders still clung to each other, perfectly dressed, their smiles polished like they were auditioning for a commercial. The athletes, though older and softer around the edges, still laughed the loudest, their voices booming across the room. The quiet ones, the bookworms, the overlooked kids, they huddled together in the corners, much like I used to. And then there was me. I hovered near the entrance for a moment, scanning the room. I felt like an intruder in my own building, watching as people relived their glory days. There was a table of name tags, each with a picture from our yearbook attached. I picked mine up, staring at the awkward teenage version of myself printed next to my name. The girl in that photo had wide eyes, frizzy hair, and a forced smile that barely hid her fear of being noticed. I slipped the tag on and moved into the crowd. Almost instantly, I felt the shift in the air. Eyes flicked toward me. Glances exchanged, whispers passed. I told myself I was imagining it, but then I caught the first smirk. Then the second. And then the words. "Same Amelia." Someone whispered behind me. "Still dressing like she shops at the clearance rack." Another voice chuckled. "At least she's consistent." I gritted my teeth, forcing myself to breathe. I had expected this, hadn't I? I had known the moment I decided to come that people might not have changed. Still, the sting was sharp, familiar, and far too easy to fall back into. I approached the buffet table, pretending to study the spread of appetizers, but the whispers followed me like shadows. "Did you see what she's wearing? God, you'd think she'd at least try for tonight." I almost feel sorry for her. Almost. Their words carried me back in time, to every cafeteria lunch where I sat alone, every hallway walk where laughter trailed me like a cruel echo. I had told myself I was stronger now, that I could handle it. But standing there, surrounded by people who hadn't grown up at all, I felt that same familiar ache in my chest. Still, I didn't leave. Instead, I looked around, observing. Some people had clearly come to impress, dressed in designer suits and glittering dresses, eager to showcase how well life had treated them. Others were more subdued, their weariness showing in the lines of their faces. And then there were those who hadn't changed a bit, still arrogant, still cruel, still feeding off the humiliation of others. The queen bee herself, Evelyn, was at the center of it all. She wore a dress that sparkled under the chandeliers, her hair styled perfectly, her smile calculated. She spotted me almost immediately, her eyes flicking up and down my outfit before her lips curved into that same smirk she had worn all those years ago. "Well, look who decided to show up," she said loudly enough for half the room to hear. "Amelia. Still, understated, I see." Laughter rippled through the group around her. I forced a smile, nodding politely. "Good to see you too." She tilted her head, pretending to be kind, but her eyes glittered with mockery. "Brave of you to come, really. I wasn't sure you'd want to relive old times." "I almost didn't," I admitted, keeping my tone light. "But I figured why not?" She laughed, linking arms with one of her old friends. Why not, indeed. The conversation moved on, but I could feel her eyes on me, judging, calculating. As the evening continued, the pattern repeated itself. Old classmates came up to me, offering fake smiles and shallow compliments that barely hid their condescension. "So, Amelia, what have you been up to?" they'd ask. Their tone polite, but their eyes scanning me like I was a curiosity at a museum. "I run a business," I'd reply simply, keeping it vague. "Oh, that's nice," they'd say, before quickly drifting off to someone more interesting. I sipped my drink, moved through the room, and reminded myself over and over, you don't need their approval. You never did. Still, their laughter was relentless. At one point, I overheard someone say, I swear, she hasn't changed a bit. Always the outsider. Another chimed in, at least she's consistently boring. My heart pounded, my palms sweaty, but I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. Instead, I stayed. I listened. I observed. Because what they didn't know was that their cruelty was only making my eventual reveal all the more satisfying. The more they laughed at me, the more I thought about the irony. They stood there, sipping champagne, congratulating themselves on their success, mocking me for my clothes, all while standing in a building with my name on the deed. They thought I was powerless. They thought I was the same old Amelia. But what they didn't know was that every cruel word was pushing me closer to the truth I was about to reveal. What they didn't know was that every cruel word was pushing me closer to the truth I was about to reveal. They didn't just laugh at my clothes, they tried to laugh me out of the room. I knew, deep down, that coming to the reunion meant opening old wounds. I had prepared myself for whispers, for fake smiles, for side glances. But I hadn't prepared for how quickly the mocking would escalate. At first, it was just quiet chuckles. Sly comments meant to sting without being obvious. But as the night wore on and the drinks flowed, their cruelty grew louder, bolder, and sharper. It started near the buffet table. I was standing in line, waiting my turn for hors d'oeuvres, when I overheard a group behind me. Do you think Amelia even owns anything designer? One woman asked with a laugh, another snickered. Please, she probably thrifted that dress like she always did. It looks vintage. The way she said vintage made it sound like an insult, not a compliment. A man added, I guess some people never move up in the world. Laughter followed, bubbling around me like poison. I gripped my plate tighter, fighting the urge to whirl around and scream. Instead, I forced myself to breathe, to stay calm. But then Evelyn made her move. She was the center of attention, as always, holding court near the dance floor with a circle of admirers. When she saw me across the room, her smile widened not in kindness, but in malice. Everyone, she called out, her voice carrying across the room. Do you remember in high school when Amelia wore that green sweater every single week? I swear, I thought it was glued to her body. The crowd around her burst into laughter. Some people glanced at me with awkward pity, but most just laughed along, too eager to stay in her good graces. I felt my cheeks burn. That sweater had been my favorite back then, a thrift store find that I cherished because it was warm and soft. It had been all I could afford, and yes, I had worn it often. But hearing her throw it out like a punchline, all these years later, made the humiliation fresh again. I clenched my fists at my sides, reminding myself, you're not that girl anymore. You're not powerless. But Evelyn wasn't finished. She tilted her head, her eyes glittering with cruelty. And now, well, I see some things never change. Same Amelia, same fashion sense. The room erupted again. I heard someone mutter, she really did wear the wrong thing tonight. Another voice snorted. She probably didn't know there'd be photographers. It felt like the walls were closing in. The music, the laughter, the clinking glasses, it all blurred together into one roaring wave of shame. My stomach twisted, my throat tight. I wanted to run, to escape, to hide like I had so many times in high school. But I didn't. I stood there, rooted in place, my heart pounding, my chest rising and falling with sharp breaths. I forced myself to meet Evelyn's eyes across the room. She smirked at me, triumphant, certain she had won yet again. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. The humiliation was still there, sharp and heavy. But beneath it, another feeling began to grow. Anger. Not the wild, out-of-control kind, but something colder, steadier. A quiet fury that whispered, enough. I looked around the room. Really looked. Yes. They were laughing. Yes, they were mocking me. But beneath their polished exteriors, I saw cracks. The athletes with thinning hair and growing bellies, clinging to memories of touchdowns from decades ago. The cheerleaders whose beauty now looked brittle, stretched too thin under makeup and forced smiles. The so-called cool kids, bragging about careers that sounded less impressive the more they explained. They hadn't grown. They hadn't changed. They were still trapped in the same shallow world that had defined them in high school. And me? I had built an empire. I almost laughed at the irony. They were mocking my clothes, not realizing that the very room they stood in, the chandeliers above, the polished floors beneath, the bar serving their drinks, belonged to me. I thought about walking out, about leaving them to their petty games, but then I realized, why should I? Why should I give them the satisfaction of seeing me retreat? No. Not this time. So I stayed. I endured every jab, every whisper, every cruel laugh. I let them think they were winning. I let Evelyn believe she still had power over me. But inside, I was calm. Because I knew something they didn't. They were playing an old game. One they'd perfected in high school. But I wasn't the same opponent anymore. Their cruelty didn't break me, it fueled me. Every laugh, every insult, every smirk only reminded me of how far I had come. And every second they underestimated me brought me closer to the moment I would finally reveal the truth. I caught Evelyn's eye one last time and gave her a small, polite smile. She tilted her head, smug, thinking she had put me back in my place. But I knew better. And in that moment, I knew exactly how I'd shatter their perfect little illusion. I was done being their joke, it was time to tell the truth. The longer I stood in that ballroom, the heavier the weight of their laughter pressed down on me. My chest was tight, my palms damp, my mind swirling with the urge to just disappear. But beneath the shame and the sting, another feeling had been quietly building resolve. For years, I had let their voices define me. In high school, I had been powerless, too scared to stand up for myself. I had taken their insults, their laughter, their cruelty, and swallowed it whole. But tonight was different. Tonight, I had the truth on my side. And the truth was power. I watched Evelyn laugh, her voice sharp and cutting as she made another comment about my outfit. She thrived on attention, on the way people bent toward her like moths to a flame. Even now, a decade later, she still held herself like the queen of the room. But queens can fall. I set down my half-empty glass, my hands steadying on the tablecloth. My heart hammered, but it wasn't fear anymore, it was anticipation. One particularly loud insult rang out from the corner. Amelia looks like she dressed straight out of 2008. The laughter that followed was loud enough to drown out the music for a moment. Heads turned, eyes locked on me, waiting for me to shrink back like I always had. But this time, I didn't. I straightened my shoulders, lifted my chin, and took a step forward. Then another. The sound of my heels against the polished floor cut through the laughter, and slowly, the noise began to die down. People turned, curious, watching. I stopped in the center of the room, near the stage where the DJ had been playing throwback hits all night. My voice, when I spoke, was calm but steady, carrying farther than I expected. You know, I began, it's funny, after all these years some things never change. Some of you are still laughing at my clothes, still making me the punchline, just like in high school. A ripple of awkwardness passed through the room. Some shifted uncomfortably, others smirked, but all eyes were on me. Evelyn tilted her head, her smirk deepening, clearly expecting me to crumble. I took a breath, steady and strong. But here's the difference. Back then, I didn't have a voice. Back then, I believed your words defined me. Back then, I thought I was small. But I'm not small anymore, and tonight I think it's time you all heard the truth. The room went silent. Even the DJ turned the music down, sensing something was happening. Evelyn laughed lightly, trying to break the tension. Oh, Amelia, don't be so dramatic. We're just having fun. I locked eyes with her, my voice cutting through her false charm. Fun? Is that what you call it? Humiliating someone? Mocking them? Tearing them down just so you can feel bigger? If that's your idea of fun, then I guess some things really haven't changed since high school. Her smile faltered, just slightly. The silence around us grew heavier. For a moment, I considered stopping there. I had said my piece, and maybe that would have been enough. But then I remembered every bathroom stall I had cried in, every lunch I had eaten alone, every night I had gone to bed wondering if I'd ever be enough. No. This moment wasn't just about speaking, it was about reclaiming. I let my gaze sweep across the room. You've all spent the evening laughing at me, mocking my clothes, pretending I don't belong. But the truth is, you're standing in my building. Gasps rippled through the room. Confused glances, furrowed brows. Evelyn blinked, her smirk finally slipping. I continued, my voice strong. That's right. This venue, the lights above your head, the food on your plates, the drinks in your glasses, it all belongs to me. I bought this place years ago. I've been running it ever since. So while you've been laughing at me for what I'm wearing, you've been standing on my property. The silence was deafening. People exchanged stunned looks, their laughter dissolving into disbelief. I saw jaws drop, eyes widen, hands tighten, around wine glasses. Evelyn's face went pale. She opened her mouth but no words came out. For once, she didn't have a snide remark ready. I let the silence stretch, savoring the moment. For years I had been invisible to these people. Tonight I was undeniable. Finally I said, "So go ahead. Keep laughing at my dress if you want. It doesn't change the truth. And the truth is, I don't need your approval anymore. I never did." With that, I turned and walked back toward my table. My steps were steady, my heart racing, but I felt taller than I ever had before. The whispers erupted behind me, frantic and shocked. Some people muttered apologies, others simply stared. Evelyn sat frozen, her glass trembling in her hand. For the first time, the power in that room didn't belong to her, it belonged to me. And then, with one sentence, I changed everything. The laughter died instantly when I told them the truth. For a moment, the silence was so thick I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. My words hung in the air like smoke, heavy and undeniable. This venue belongs to me. The same mouths that had just been laughing at me were now frozen open, their eyes darting around as if they needed visual proof of what I'd just said. I saw people glance up at the chandeliers, at the polished floors, at the bar stocked with champagne and then back at me, like they were trying to piece together an impossible puzzle. Someone near the back broke the silence. "Wait, what did she just say?" I turned to face the crowd again, calm and composed, even though my pulse was racing. "You heard me. This venue, this building we're standing in, it's mine. I bought it years ago. I manage it. I own it. Every event that happens here runs through me." Another stunned whisper rippled through the room. A woman near the buffet dropped her fork with a sharp clatter. I could feel dozens of eyes on me, all of them struggling to reconcile the Amelia they thought they knew with the truth I had just laid out. To them, I had always been the poor girl, the outsider, the target of jokes. And now, I was the one who had built something they couldn't even dream of. Evelyn was the first to recover, though her voice trembled when she spoke. You're joking. You expect us to believe that you own this place?" I met her gaze evenly. "I don't expect you to believe me. I don't need you to. The truth doesn't depend on your approval, Evelyn." Her cheeks flushed, her carefully constructed confidence beginning to crack. A man from our class, Jason, one of the former athletes, raised his eyebrows. "So, you actually own this place? Like, the whole thing?" "Yes," I said simply. "The deed has my name on it. Every wedding, every gala, every corporate event that happens here, my team and I make it happen, including this reunion." The room erupted in murmurs, disbelief swirling like a storm. Some people gasped, others exchanged wide-eyed glances, and a few even laughed nervously, not knowing what else to do. One woman whispered to her friend, "She's not kidding. My cousin got married here last year. Amelia's name was on the contract." That confirmation spread quickly, and soon the murmurs turned into stunned silence again. For the first time in the entire evening, I wasn't the one shrinking under their scrutiny. I stood tall, my simple dress suddenly feeling like armor instead of a weakness. Their laughter no longer pierced me, it bounced off, powerless against the truth. Evelyn tried to laugh, but the sound was hollow. Well, good for you, Amelia. I suppose everyone has their niche. Her attempt to downplay it was transparent, and people weren't buying it. I saw her friends shifting uncomfortably, their loyalty wavering now that her power was slipping. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. I simply said, call it a niche if you want. I call it success. I worked for this. I built it, and I did it without tearing anyone else down. The weight of those words landed hard. I saw some people flinch, as if they knew exactly who I was referring to. A man I barely remembered, quiet, reserved, raised his glass toward me. Congratulations, Amelia. That's really impressive. Others began to nod, some even clapping softly. Not everyone, of course. Some sat stiff and silent, unwilling to admit their mistake. But enough people showed their respect that the balance of the room shifted. For years, I had been invisible. Tonight, I was undeniable. I took another steady breath, my voice firm but calm. I didn't come here to brag. I didn't come here to prove anything. But when you spend the night laughing at me, mocking me like you did when we were kids, I think you deserve to know the truth. I am not the girl you remember. I am not powerless. And I am not your joke anymore. Silence again, this time not from disbelief, but from respect. I sat back down at my table, my hands steady, my heart racing with a mixture of adrenaline and relief. The whispers continued, but they were different now. Not mocking, not cruel, curious, surprised, maybe even admiring. Evelyn stayed frozen in her chair, her smile brittle, her eyes flickering with something I recognized instantly: fear. Because she knew. The power she had wielded for so long, the power of humiliation, of ridicule, was gone. She couldn't laugh me out of the room anymore. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to beg for acceptance. I didn't need to prove anything. I had spoken the truth, and the truth had done all the work for me. And just like that, the entire room shifted. The same mouths that had mocked me now had nothing left to say. The room that once echoed with laughter now buzzed with shame. After my words settled into the silence, the room felt different. It wasn't filled with mocking laughter anymore. It hummed with tension, confusion, and a strange, uncomfortable respect. People didn't know whether to clap, to apologize, or to pretend they hadn't just been tearing me apart 5 minutes earlier. For the first time all night, I was the center of attention. But not because I was their joke, because I had become their mirror, showing them the smallness of their cruelty compared to the enormity of my truth. Evelyn was the first to move. She stood slowly, her wineglass trembling in her hand, though she tried to cover it with a calculated smile. Well, she said, her voice pitched too high. Isn't that just wonderful? Amelia, congratulations, we're all so proud of you. Her words dripped with forced sweetness, but I could hear the bitterness beneath them. It was the same tone she had used in high school when she complimented my shoes by saying they looked like they came out of a dumpster. The room sensed it too, her mask slipping even as she scrambled to hold it together. Before I could respond, another voice cut in. It was Jason, the former football star who had been part of her circle back in the day. He leaned forward in his chair, his voice steady. No, seriously, Amelia, that's incredible. Owning this place? Running a business like that? That takes guts. Respect. A murmur of agreement rippled around the room. Heads nodded. Glasses lifted slightly in acknowledgement. Evelyn's smile faltered. Her grip on her wineglass tightened. Thank you, I worked hard for it. Another classmate, Melissa, one of the quieter girls I remembered from the back of the classroom, spoke up softly. I always thought you were stronger than people gave you credit for. I'm glad you proved them wrong. Her words touched me more than I expected. I offered her a genuine smile. Thank you. That means a lot. But not everyone was gracious. From the back, I heard a scoff. Daniel, one of Evelyn's closest allies from high school, shook his head. Oh, come on. So, you own a building. Big deal. That doesn't change who you are. I turned toward him, calm but firm. You're right. It doesn't change who I am. But it does change what I won't tolerate anymore. And what I won't tolerate is being laughed at for existing. The room went quiet again, all eyes flicking between us. Daniel opened his mouth to argue, but no words came out. He leaned back in his chair, muttering something under his breath that nobody paid attention to. Meanwhile, Evelyn tried again, her voice brittle but still clinging to authority. Well, I suppose it's inspiring, in a way. Rags to riches. I mean, look at you now. The condescension in her tone was obvious, but it fell flat. People weren't laughing with her anymore, they were watching me. Waiting for me. I didn't take the bait. I simply said, "It's not about riches. It's about respect." Something a lot of us didn't get in high school. That landed hard. I saw faces shift, some guilty, some ashamed, some thoughtful. People who had stood by silently in high school, letting Evelyn and her circle mock me, now had to face the truth of their complicity. A woman I barely remembered approached me cautiously, her hands clasped. "Amelia, I owe you an apology. Back then, I laughed at the jokes. I didn't stand up for you, and I should have. I'm sorry." Her sincerity caught me off guard. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Then, I nodded. "Thank you. That means more than you know." Others followed, not everyone, of course. But enough. Quiet words of regret, awkward smiles that hinted at shame. They trickled in one by one, creating a strange mix of guilt and respect that filled the room. Evelyn sat stiffly, her circle thinning as people drifted away from her. For once, she wasn't the sun everyone revolved around. She was just another guest at the reunion, her power crumbling in silence. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The shift in the room was enough. I looked around, meeting the eyes of people who once looked through me. This time, they didn't look away. Some smiled. Some looked down in shame. But none of them laughed. The power balance had changed completely. I sat back down, my simple blue dress draped over the same chair that a few hours ago had felt like a place of shame. Now, it felt like a throne. Not because of money, not because of ownership, but because I had finally taken back the dignity they had stolen from me years ago. The rest of the night unfolded differently. Conversations shifted. People asked about my business, my life, my journey. Some were genuinely curious, others faked interest to cover their earlier cruelty. I answered politely, but I never forgot who they had been before my revelation. The most satisfying part wasn't their apologies or their respect. It was the silence of those who had mocked me the loudest. Evelyn's laughter was gone. Daniel's arrogance had withered. Their power had evaporated the moment the truth was spoken. For the first time at a reunion, I wasn't invisible. I was undeniable. But the night wasn't over, the real shift was just beginning. Once the truth was out, nothing about that room felt the same. The moment the truth left my lips, it was like the entire room had been struck by lightning. Every corner of the ballroom, every circle of whispered conversations, every glance, they all shifted. The energy was different. I had flipped the script, and there was no going back. For years, I had been the outsider. The girl they laughed at, ignored, or conveniently erased from photos. But now, the air buzzed with something else. Curiosity, respect, and from some, fear. I watched as people adjusted themselves around me. The same classmates who had laughed at my clothes just an hour earlier now leaned toward me with forced smiles. "So, Amelia, tell me more about your business," they said, their voices dripping with sudden interest. "You must be so busy running a place like this." I answered politely but vaguely. "It keeps me busy," I said with a smile. Inside, I marveled at the irony. These were the same people who once wouldn't give me the time of day, and now they were desperate to prove they had some kind of connection to me. A few of them tried to cover their earlier cruelty with flattery. One woman touched my arm and said, "You've always had such a unique sense of style." I admire that. Her tone was syrupy sweet, but I remembered her voice from high school, the way she once told me I looked like I dressed out of a garbage bag. I didn't call her out. I didn't need to. Her desperation was obvious. Not everyone pretended. A handful of people were sincere, curious not about my success, but about my journey. Jason, the former athlete, asked thoughtful questions about how I got started. Melissa, the quiet girl, listened closely, her eyes kind and genuine. I found myself enjoying those conversations, realizing that not everyone had been cruel back then. Some had simply been silent, too afraid to step outside the crowd. But the ones who had been cruelest? They couldn't look me in the eye. Daniel sulked in the corner, glaring into his drink as though it had betrayed him. His earlier arrogance had evaporated, leaving only bitterness. He muttered something to Evelyn, but she ignored him. And Evelyn, well, her throne had crumbled. She still tried to smile, still tried to hold court, but fewer people surrounded her now. Some even glanced at her with pity, as though they were embarrassed for her. Every so often, she shot me a look filled with venom. But it no longer carried weight. Her power had always been in making people laugh at someone else's expense, but now, nobody was laughing. The rest of the night felt surreal. I moved through the ballroom with a confidence I had never known before. I spoke with people I hadn't thought of in years, accepted their congratulations with grace, and even laughed a little. The music picked up again, but it wasn't the same kind of noise. It wasn't laughter at me. It was laughter around me. And for once, I wasn't excluded. I caught glimpses of myself in the mirrors along the wall. The woman staring back wasn't the awkward girl from high school yearbooks. She wasn't the invisible classmate cropped out of photos. She was calm, collected, and strong. It was in those reflections that I realized the truth. I didn't just own the building. I owned myself. At one point, the reunion committee chair, a woman named Claire, came over to me with a sheepish smile. "Amelia, I had no idea this venue was yours. We just booked it through the usual channels." I smiled. "That's how I like it. I don't advertise myself when I don't need to." She nodded, her cheeks flushing. "Well, thank you for hosting us. This is really something." I could tell she wasn't just talking about the venue. Later in the evening, I stepped outside onto the balcony to catch some air. The city lights stretched out in front of me, glittering against the night sky. For the first time all night, I felt truly at peace. I thought back to the girl I used to be, the Amelia who cried quietly in bathrooms, who begged her reflection in the mirror to somehow look better, who prayed for the day she might finally belong. That girl had never imagined this moment. She had never imagined standing tall, owning the very ground her tormentors walked on, and not needing their approval to feel whole. I whispered to her, silently, "We made it. You don't have to be small anymore." When I returned inside, the mood was even lighter. People were dancing, chatting, and drinking. But the undercurrent had shifted. I wasn't the target anymore. I was the example. And though some of them might never admit it, they knew it. As the evening wound down, a few people came to say goodbye, offering handshakes and hugs. Some were sincere. Others were just trying to save face. I accepted all of it with a polite smile. Evelyn didn't approach me again. She left quietly, her pride too wounded to risk another public exchange. Daniel trailed behind her, muttering under his breath. Watching them go, I felt no triumph, no gloating, only freedom. Because the truth was, this night wasn't about them anymore. It was about me. It was about reclaiming the pieces of myself they had tried to break. It was about standing in the same room where I had once been so small and realizing I was bigger than all of it. When the lights dimmed and the last guests filtered out, I stood in the center of the ballroom and looked around. The chandeliers sparkled above me, the polished floors gleamed beneath me, and the air still hummed with the echoes of laughter, not cruel laughter, but something lighter. I breathed it in, slow and steady, and smiled. For the first time at a reunion, I wasn't invisible. I was undeniable. For the first time at a reunion, I wasn't invisible. I was undeniable. When I finally left the reunion, the night air felt different, lighter. The reunion ended the way all reunions do, slowly, with people clinging to the last conversations, reluctant to let go of nostalgia, even when the night had already given them what it could. As I stepped out into the cool evening air, I pulled my cardigan tighter around me and took a deep breath. The city smelled different at night, cleaner, quieter, like it was holding its breath. My heels clicked against the pavement as I walked toward my car, the echoes fading into the silence that wrapped itself around me. For the first time all evening, I was alone. No whispers, no smirks, no eyes scanning me like I was unworthy. Just me, under the soft glow of street lamps, the night stretching endlessly above. And in that stillness, everything I had held back came rushing forward. I leaned against my car door and closed my eyes. The images from the night replayed themselves. Evelyn's smirk fading when I told the truth, the gasps of disbelief, the whispers that turned into silence. I thought about the apologies, the forced flattery, the awkward respect that had followed. I thought about the look on Daniel's face when his mockery collapsed into bitterness. About the way Evelyn's smile cracked under the weight of reality. For years, I had imagined moments like this. I had dreamed of standing in front of them and proving I wasn't who they thought I was. I had played out fantasy after fantasy where I walked into a room and silenced them with the truth of who I'd become. But the reality felt different. Yes, it was satisfying. Yes, it was vindicating. But more than anything, it was freeing. The power of their laughter had lived inside me for so long, echoing through my memories, shaping my insecurities. But tonight, I realized it had only ever been an illusion. Their words had no weight anymore. Their cruelty had no hold on me. The moment I spoke my truth, it dissolved. I whispered into the night, as if speaking to my younger self, "You don't have to be afraid anymore. They can't hurt you." The tears came then, soft, quiet, not of pain but of release. Years of carrying that weight, years of shrinking myself, years of wondering if I'd ever be enough, they slipped out of me in the form of tears on my cheeks. I thought about the girl I had been. The Amelia who sat alone in the cafeteria, pushing food around on her tray so it looked like she was eating. The Amelia who begged her reflection to look better before school. The Amelia who wore the same sweater over and over because it was all she had, and endured the mockery that followed. If I could go back and speak to her, I would hold her face in my hands and tell her, "One day, you will own the very room they try to laugh you out of. One day, their words will be powerless. One day, you will be free." I smiled through my tears, whispering softly, "We made it." Driving home, the city lights blurred against the windshield as I replayed the evening in my mind. I thought about the classmates who had apologized, the ones who had avoided me, the ones who had suddenly treated me with kindness. Some of it was sincere, some of it was desperation. But none of it mattered as much as I thought it would. Because the truth was, I didn't go there for them. I went there for me. I went to prove to myself that I could stand in that room, face the ghosts of my past, and not crumble. That I could walk through the fire of their laughter and come out unburned. And I had. When I reached my house, I didn't go inside right away. Instead, I sat in the car, staring at the place I had built for myself. It wasn't extravagant, but it was mine. Every brick, every wall, every piece of furniture was a reminder of how far I had come. I thought about legacy, what we leave behind, what people remember about us. For years, my legacy in the minds of my classmates had been the poor girl, the outsider, the joke. Tonight, I had rewritten that story. They would never look at me the same way again. But more importantly, I would never look at myself the same way again. I had spent so much of my life trying to prove myself, trying to claw my way into spaces where I was never meant to fit. But now, I saw clearly. I didn't need their spaces. I had built my own. And in my space, I wasn't cropped out of the photo. I wasn't the punchline. I wasn't invisible. I was enough. I finally stepped inside, slipping off my shoes and setting down my bag. The quiet of my home wrapped around me like a blanket. I walked to the mirror in the hallway, the one that had reflected both my lowest moments and my proudest triumphs. I looked at myself, really looked. My navy dress, my simple cardigan, my face still glowing from the emotions of the night. For the first time in my life, I didn't see flaws. I didn't see someone to hide. I saw strength. I whispered to my reflection, "You did it." And for once, I believed it. I realized I hadn't just won their respect, I had reclaimed my own. That night didn't just end the past, it opened the future. The morning after the reunion, I woke up with sunlight streaming across my bed. For a moment, I lay still, staring at the ceiling, letting the events of the night settle in my mind. It felt like I had closed a chapter I'd been stuck in for years. The laughter, the cruelty, the whispers, they didn't haunt me anymore. They felt like echoes, faint and powerless. And in the silence that remained, something new began to grow. Possibility. For so long, my life had been about proving myself. Proving I wasn't the girl they said I was. Proving I was strong enough, smart enough, worthy enough. But now, I realized I didn't have to prove anything. Not to them, not to anyone. I had nothing left to prove. And everything left to build. That realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. If I wasn't living to prove them wrong anymore, then I was free to live for myself. The first thing I did was reimagine what I wanted my days to look like. Running a business had consumed me for years, and while I loved it, I also realized I had been working like I was still that poor girl desperate for scraps of validation. I had built something incredible, but I had barely stopped to enjoy it. So I made changes. I hired more staff, delegating the tasks I used to hoard out of fear. I took Fridays off, something I never thought I'd allow myself before. I started taking long walks in the park near my house. Not because it was productive, but because it made me happy. I began traveling too. Not the kind of quick work-focused trips I had taken before, but real, soul-refreshing travel. I went to Italy and walked through cobblestone streets, eating gelato, marveling at how history lingered in every stone. I hiked through the green hills of Ireland, letting the wind whip through my hair. I stood at the edge of the Grand Canyon, awed by the sheer vastness of it all. Each trip reminded me that the world was bigger than my past. That life wasn't about shrinking myself to fit into someone else's expectations, but about expanding into everything I wanted to be. I also started to build deeper connections. The reunion had reminded me how shallow and fleeting some relationships could be. So I focused on surrounding myself with people who truly saw me, friends who celebrated my victories without jealousy, who sat with me in silence when I struggled, who made me laugh until my stomach hurt. I hosted dinners at my home, filling the space with warmth and laughter. We cooked together, shared stories, and took photos, real photos, unposed, messy, filled with joy. And every time I looked at those pictures, I smiled. Because this time, there was no one cropping me out. I even allowed myself to dream about love again. For years, I had held back, too afraid of being vulnerable, too afraid of letting someone close enough to see my scars. But slowly, I opened myself up. I went on dates, not with the pressure of needing to be perfect, but with the curiosity of discovering who I was in this new chapter of my life. Some connections didn't last, but each one taught me something. That I was worthy of love, just as I was. That I didn't need to change myself to be chosen. That the right person wouldn't see me as a project or a punchline, but as a partner. And as I built this new future, I also found ways to give back. I remembered what it felt like to be that girl in the cafeteria, invisible and ridiculed. I thought about how different my life might have been if someone had reached out, offered kindness, given me a chance. So I started a scholarship fund through my business for kids who came from backgrounds like mine, who didn't have much but had dreams too big to ignore. I mentored young entrepreneurs, teaching them how to build their businesses without losing themselves in the process. I spoke at schools, sharing my story not to boast, but to show the quiet kids in the back that they weren't alone. Each time I gave back, I felt like I was healing another piece of that younger Amelia inside me. The girl who once thought she'd never escape her smallness was now helping others step into their greatness. And through it all, I felt lighter. The reunion hadn't just been about showing my classmates who I had become, it had been about showing myself that I was free. free from their laughter, free from their judgment, free from the chains of the past. Now, the future stretched out before me, wide and open, waiting for me to step into it. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid. I wasn't building a life to prove anyone wrong. I was building a life because I deserved it. The girl they mocked was gone forever, the woman who replaced her was unstoppable. I wish I could go back to that girl who cried in bathroom stalls and tell her the truth. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and the world feels far away, I think about her, the girl I used to be. The girl who sat in the back of classrooms, praying no one would notice her. The girl who wore the same sweater again and again because it was all she had, and then endured the laughter that followed. The girl who cried silently in bathroom stalls, holding her breath so no one would hear. I think about her, and my heart aches. If I could sit across from her now, I would take her hands in mine and look her straight in the eye. And I would tell her everything she needs to hear. Amelia, I would say, I know you feel invisible. I know you feel like you'll never be enough, no matter how hard you try. I know the laughter feels endless, and the whispers feel like daggers you can't pull out. I know every day feels like a battle you're already losing. But listen to me, you are not as small as they make you feel. I'd watch her eyes widen, doubtful, because back then she didn't believe compliments. She thought kindness was a trick. Another setup for humiliation. But I would keep going. You think their laughter defines you. You think the way they look at your clothes, your shoes, your hair, that it says something about your worth? But it doesn't. Their cruelty isn't a reflection of you. It's a reflection of them. And one day, you'll see that clearly. I'd squeeze her hands tighter, making sure she felt the weight of my words. You're stronger than you think. Every insult, every laugh, every moment they try to erase you, it's building something inside you. A fire, a resilience, a strength they'll never understand. You won't see it now, but years from now, that strength will carry you farther than you ever dreamed. I imagine her shaking her head, tears in her eyes, whispering, "But I'm so tired. I don't know how much longer I can keep pretending it doesn't hurt." And I'd nod, because I know. I'd let her cry. Let her feel it all. Because I remember how heavy that pain was. And when the tears slowed, I'd whisper, "I know it hurts. But it won't always. I promise you one day, you won't just survive. You'll thrive." I'd tell her about the future. About the business she would build from nothing. About the nights she would sit in her own office, surrounded by the hum of computers and the voices of employees who respected her. About the properties she would own, including one that would host the very reunion where those who mocked her would see her truth. I'd tell her about the laughter she would one day share, not the cruel kind that cut her down, but the warm kind that lifted her up. The laughter of friends gathered around her table, of dinners filled with joy, of photos that no one would ever crop her out of again. I'd tell her that one day, she would look in the mirror and see, not flaws, but strength. That she would stand tall, shoulders back, no longer hiding, no longer shrinking, no longer apologizing for existing. And then I'd tell her the most important part. You don't need their approval. You never did. One day, you'll see that your worth has nothing to do with the clothes you wear, the car you drive, or the people who laugh at you. Your worth is in your heart, your resilience, your ability to rise every time you fall. That's what makes you powerful. That's what makes you unstoppable. I imagine her crying again. But this time, not out of pain, out of relief. Because finally, someone would be telling her what she had always needed to hear. And maybe, just maybe, she would believe me. The truth is, I can't go back and change her past. I can't erase the laughter or the cruelty. I can't stop her from crying in bathroom stalls or feeling like she'll never belong. But what I can do, what I have done, is honor her. I've taken her pain and turned it into strength. I've taken her invisibility and turned it into presence. I've taken her scars and turned them into a map that led me here. She may not know it, but she was never weak. She was never worthless. She was the foundation. And if she could see me now, the woman I've become, I think she'd finally understand. She'd see that every cruel word, every painful day, every lonely night wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning. I'd hold her one last time and whisper, "You'll be okay. Better than okay. One day, you'll walk into a room full of the people who once laughed at you, and you'll own it. And you won't even need their laughter anymore, because you'll have your own joy. I promise you, Amelia, you will be free." And in that vision, she smiles through her tears. Because the girl who once hid in shame became the woman who owned the room. They mocked my clothes, but I owned the ground they stood on. It has been weeks since the reunion, but the echoes of that night still linger, not the cruel laughter, but the silence that followed my truth. For years, I thought that moment would be about revenge, about finally turning the tables. But standing there in that ballroom, watching their arrogance dissolve, I realized it wasn't about them at all. It was about me. For so long, my story had been written by other people. In high school, I was the poor girl, the outsider, the joke. Every whispered insult, every mocking laugh, every photo I was cropped out of, they were chapters in a story I never chose. But that night at the reunion, I picked up the pen. I rewrote the ending. And what I learned is this: the sweetest revenge isn't humiliation or even victory, it's freedom. Freedom from their judgment. Freedom from their power. Freedom from the lies I once believed about myself. When I think about legacy now, I don't think about money or buildings or even accomplishments. I think about the story I'll leave behind. I want people to remember not just that I succeeded, but that I endured, that I took cruelty and turned it into strength, that I turned silence into a voice, that I turned shame into pride. That's the legacy I want to leave. Not everyone will understand. Some of my classmates will always see me through the lens of who I was in high school. They'll cling to their version of me, the one they could laugh at, because it makes them feel bigger. That's fine. Their opinion doesn't define me. What matters is the girl I used to be, the Amelia who thought she would never escape, never belong, never be enough. If she could see me now, she'd know that her story didn't end in that cafeteria. It didn't end in whispers or cruelty. It ended in triumph. And maybe that's why I feel compelled to share my story, not just with friends, not just with people I trust, but with anyone who has ever felt small. Anyone who has ever been laughed at for being different. Anyone who has ever been told they weren't enough. Because I want them to know the truth. Being mocked doesn't mean you're weak. Being overlooked doesn't mean you're worthless. And sometimes, the very things people use to tear you down become the stones you use to build your foundation. If you keep going, if you keep fighting, if you keep believing that there's more waiting for you one day, you'll stand where I stood. And you'll realize you were powerful all along. I've started journaling more these days, not just about my past but about my future. I write about the life I'm building, the travels I want to take, the causes I want to support, the people I want to surround myself with. I write about creating spaces where kindness wins, where laughter lifts instead of crushes. I also write letters to my younger self, letters she'll never read but that help me heal. Every time I put pen to paper, I feel like I'm reaching back in time and whispering to her, "You're going to be okay, more than okay. You're going to be extraordinary." And maybe, just maybe, those letters aren't just for her. Maybe they're for anyone who needs to hear it. Because the truth is, we all have our reunion moments. Moments when the past comes back to test us. Moments when the people who once hurt us try to pull us back into who we used to be. And in those moments, we get to choose. Do we shrink? Or do we stand tall? That night, I stood tall. I didn't just tell them who I had become. I showed myself. I saw, with crystal clarity, that I am no longer defined by what others say. I am defined by what I choose to build, by the kindness I choose to give, by the strength I choose to live with. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Your past can shape you, but it doesn't have to cage you. You can step out. You can rise. You can own the very ground where you were once made to feel small. So when I think about legacy, I don't think about Evelyn or Daniel or anyone who laughed at me. I think about the girl who needed hope. I think about the people out there still living in the shadows of their own reunions, still waiting for a day when they'll finally feel seen. And my message to them is simple. Don't wait for their approval. Build your own stage. Create your own story. One day, you'll look back and realize you didn't need them at all. That's my legacy. That's what I want carved into the memory of everyone I meet, not that I owned a building, but that I owned my life. I look at the photos I keep now, smiling faces of friends around my table, snapshots from travels, candid moments of laughter. They're messy, imperfect, real. And every time I look at them, I smile. Because I know one thing for certain, no one can crop me out of these. The reunion may be over, but my story isn't. It's still unfolding, still growing, still shining brighter with every step I take. And this time, I'm not walking in shame, I'm walking in power. And that's how I learned that sometimes, the sweetest revenge is simply owning your place in the world.